The crisp sea air of Mustique, a playground for the ultra-rich, usually tasted of salt and freedom. But for billionaire financier Jason Hawthorne, it was about to taste of ash. He'd brought his mistress, the impossibly beautiful and ambitious Anastasia, to his private villa, a gilded kit nestled on this exclusive island. He thought he had everything under control, his empire, his image, his women. But as the Caribbean sun rose on what he believed would be another day in paradise, a single devastating email would ignite a firestorm. Back in New York, his wife, the elegant and dangerously intelligent Callie, had just made a call. And with that one call, Jason Hawthorne, the king of his own universe, was about to discover that hell hath no fury, like a woman scorned, especially one who knows the password to every offshore account. The Gulf Stream G650 descended towards Mustique with the silent grace of a predator. Below the Caribbean Sea was a dazzling tapestry of sapphire and turquoise, dotted with the emerald green of the Grenadine Islands. Jason Hawthorne, a man whose net worth was as vast and fluid as the ocean beneath him, barely glanced at the spectacle. His attention was consumed by the woman beside him. Anastasia Dubois was a masterpiece of genetics and ambition. Her hair, the color of dark honey, cascaded over the creamy leather of the jet seat. Her eyes, a startling shade of emerald, held a practiced innocence that belied a mind as sharp as a shard of glass. She was 24, a former art gallery assistant, who now curated a life of unimaginable luxury courtesy of Jason. "It's even more beautiful than you described, Jules," she murmured, her fingers tracing the condensation on her champagne flute. The diamond bracelet on her wrist, a casual gift from a recent trip to Antwerp, glittered with a cold fire. "The best for you, my love, Jason," replied, his voice a low rumble of satisfaction. At 52, he was still a formidable presence. His hair was more silver than black now, but his physique was honed by years of disciplined workouts with a former Mossad agent turned personal trainer. He had the kind of ruthless charm that made people feel privileged to be in his orbit, even as he was exploiting them. The private airstrip on Mustique was a sliver of asphalt carved into the lush landscape. As they disembarked, the humid air, thick with the scent of frangipane and salt, enveloped them. A custom-built electric golf cart, emblazoned with the crest of their villa, Serenity's End, was waiting. Jason had purchased the sprawling 10-acre estate a decade ago, not just as a vacation home, but as a tangible symbol of his ascent. It was his fortress of solitude, his playground, and now the stage for his latest indiscretion. Serenity's End was a marvel of modern architecture, a series of interconnected glass and teak pavilions that seemed to float above the turquoise water. An infinity pool bled into the horizon, and a private white sand beach sloped gently down to a secluded cove. The staff, a discreet team of locals who knew the value of silence, greeted them with cool towels and rum punch. For the rest of the day, Jason played the part of the magnanimous host. He and Anastasia swam in the warm sea, snorkeled among the coral reefs, and feasted on lobster and mango salad prepared by their private chef. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple, they sat on the veranda. The silence broken only by the gentle lapping of the waves and the clinking of their glasses. "To us," Jason said, raising his glass of vintage Dom Perignon. To us, Anastasia echoed, her eyes shimmering in the candlelight. But as she leaned in to kiss him, her gaze flickered for a fraction of a second towards the mainland, a dark, distant shape on the horizon. It was a fleeting, almost imperceptible movement, but it was there, a shadow in paradise. Meanwhile, 6,000 miles away in the heart of Manhattan, Callie Hawthorne was seated in the library of their Park Avenue penthouse. The room lined with first editions and priceless art was her sanctuary. Unlike Anastasia's youthful allure, Callie possessed a timeless elegance, a beauty that had been sharpened, not softened by time. At 48, she was a formidable woman in her own right, a former international lawyer who had sacrificed her career to raise their 2 children and manage the intricate social and philanthropic machinery that underpinned Jason's empire. She had always known about Jason's affairs. They were a distasteful but, in her world, not uncommon byproduct of immense wealth and power. She had tolerated them with a cool detachment, as long as he was discreet and respected the unspoken rules of their arrangement. But this time was different. This time he had broken the cardinal rule. He had taken his mistress to their island, to the home where they had spent countless family vacations, where their children had taken their first steps on the sand. It was a violation, a desecration of a sacred space. But it wasn't just the sentimental attachment to the island that fueled her cold fury. It was the audacity, the sheer unadulterated arrogance of it. He believed he was untouchable, that his wealth was a shield that made him immune to consequences. He had underestimated her. He had mistaken her quiet dignity for weakness. For the past year, ever since she had first suspected this new, more serious affair, Callie had been quietly preparing. She had used her dormant legal skills to meticulously trace the labyrinthine network of shell corporations' offshore accounts and blind trusts that constituted the Hawthorne fortune. Jason, in his hubris, had granted her full power of attorney years ago, a convenience he now would come to regret. He saw her as a partner in his life, but not in his business. A beautiful, intelligent figurehead. He had forgotten that the most dangerous opponent is the one you never see coming. She took a sip of her oolong tea, her movements calm and deliberate. Her laptop was open on the polished mahogany desk, displaying a series of encrypted files. She had spent the last 24 hours in a state of hyper-focused activity, communicating with a small, fiercely loyal team of financial analysts and lawyers she had cultivated over the years. They had worked in secret moving with the precision of a special ops team, preparing for the financial equivalent of a nuclear strike. The final piece of her plan had fallen into place an hour ago. A private investigator she had hired had sent her a single high-resolution photograph. It was of Jason and Anastasia laughing as they boarded the golf cart at Mystique's airstrip. The image was a confirmation, but also an insult. The casual intimacy of the scene, the way Anastasia's hand rested on his arm. It was a public declaration of his betrayal. Callie's phone buzzed. It was a message from her lead lawyer, a man named Marcus Thorne, a shrewd, silver-haired veteran of Wall Street's bloodiest legal battles. "All systems are go, Callie. On your command." She typed a single word in reply. "Execute." Then she closed her laptop, stood up, and walked over to the large window that overlooked the glittering expanse of Central Park. The city lights twinkled like a carpet of diamonds, a world that Jason believed he owned. But as of this moment, he was a king in a gilded cage, blissfully unaware that the bars were about to slam shut back on Mystique. Jason and Anastasia had retired to the master suite. The room was a study in understated luxury, with floor-to-ceiling glass walls that offered a panoramic view of the moonlit sea. They made love with a practiced passion, a performance of desire that had become their currency. Afterwards, Jason lay back, sated and smug, the rhythmic sound of the waves a lullaby of his own success. He fell asleep with a smile on his face, oblivious to the storm that was gathering on the other side of the world. He was Jason Hawthorne, a master of the universe. And in his universe, the sun always rose on another perfect day. But as the first rays of dawn crept over the horizon, casting a golden glow on the tranquil waters of the Caribbean, a different kind of day was dawning for Jason Hawthorne. A day of reckoning. A day when his wife, the woman he had so carelessly underestimated, would prove that the only thing more dangerous than a woman scorned is a woman with power of attorney. The sun, a mercilessly cheerful orb in the cerulean sky, streamed through the glass walls of the master suite at Serenity's End. Jason awoke slowly, a languid stretch rippling through his well-maintained physique. He felt the familiar, pleasant ache of a night well spent. Anastasia was still asleep beside him, a tangle of honey-colored hair and smooth, tanned limbs. He allowed himself a moment of pure, unadulterated satisfaction. This was his life, a life he had built with his own 2 hands, his own cunning mind. He reached for his phone on the bedside table, a reflexive gesture for a man who started his day by checking the Asian markets. He swiped the screen, his thumb tracing the familiar pattern to unlock it. Nothing. He tried again. The screen remained stubbornly black. A flicker of annoyance, nothing more. He assumed it was a dead battery, a minor inconvenience in an otherwise perfect morning. He placed it on the wireless charging pad and padded naked to the ensuite bathroom, a cavernous space of Italian marble and chrome. As the steam from the rain shower filled the room, he began to mentally run through his day. A light breakfast on the terrace, a mid-morning sail, perhaps a call to his London office to gloat about the weather. The usual routine of a man for whom work and leisure were seamlessly intertwined. 40 minutes later, showered, shaved and dressed in a pair of crisp linen trousers and a polo shirt, he returned to the bedroom. Anastasia was stirring her emerald eyes, blinking open with a practiced kittenish charm. "Morning, sleepyhead," he said, leaning down to kiss her. "Morning," she murmured, her voice thick with sleep. "What time is it?" "Time for paradise." He answered, his good mood fully restored. He picked up his phone. It was now showing a 20% charge. He unlocked it, and his world began to unravel. A cascade of notifications flooded the screen. Emails, text messages, missed calls. They were all from the same source, his private banker in Zurich, his portfolio manager in New York, and most alarmingly, the chief financial officer of his company, Hawthorne Holdings. The subject lines were a frantic staccato of urgency. Urgent, account freeze, immediate action required. A cold dread, an emotion so alien to him it was almost unrecognizable, began to seep into his veins. He opened the first email, the one from his Swiss banker, a man named Klaus Richter, with whom he'd had a relationship built on discretion and mutual profit for over 2 decades. The message was brief and brutal. Subject, account freeze notification. Urgent. Dear Mr. Hawthorne, pursuant to a legally executed order received from the signatory with full power of attorney, Callie Vance Hawthorne, all assets held in accounts associated with your name and your affiliated entities at this institution have been placed under an immediate and indefinite administrative freeze. All access, including electronic transfers, withdrawals, and credit lines, has been suspended, pending further instruction from Mrs. Hawthorne. We are legally bound to comply with this directive. I am available to discuss the procedural aspects of this matter, but I must stress that the freeze itself is non-negotiable from our end. Sincerely, Klaus Richter. Jason's breath hitched. It felt like a physical blow. He scrolled frantically through the other messages. They were all variations on the same theme. His trading accounts frozen. His corporate credit cards declined. His personal lines of credit severed. It was a digital guillotine, and the blade had fallen with swift, silent precision. "Jules, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." Anastasia was sitting up now, the silk sheet pooled around her waist. The concern in her voice was edged with something else, a nascent anxiety. Her own gilded world was entirely dependent on the man, who was now staring at his phone with a look of utter disbelief. Callie. He breathed the name, a curse on his lips. That bitch. He scrambled to make a call, his fingers fumbling on the screen. He tried to call Marcus Thorne, his own lawyer, a man he paid a king's ransom to protect him from exactly this kind of disaster. The call wouldn't connect. A pre-recorded message, cold and impersonal, informed him that his service had been suspended due to non-payment. Of course. Callie had thought of everything. The Hawthorne family mobile plan was under a corporate account, an account she now controlled. Panic, raw and visceral, began to claw at his throat. He was on a private island, a place he had chosen for its isolation, and that very isolation was now a trap. He was cut off, neutered, a king without a kingdom. He threw the phone against the wall. It shattered with a satisfyingly violent crack, but the gesture did nothing to quell the rising tide of his fury and fear. He began to pace the room like a caged animal, his mind racing, trying to find a loophole, an escape route. There had to be a mistake, a misunderstanding. Callie was angry, yes. He had expected a tearful phone call, a demand for a new obscenely expensive piece of jewelry as a penance. Not this. This was scorched earth. This was a declaration of war. He thought back to their last conversation a week ago before he'd left for Mustique. It had been stilted cool. He'd told her he was going to a wellness retreat in Arizona, a lie so flimsy he was almost insulted she hadn't challenged it. He remembered the look in her eyes now. It wasn't sadness. It was something colder, harder. It was calculation. "What do you mean? Callie?" Anastasia asked, her voice trembling slightly. "What did she do? She froze everything." He snarled, turning to face her. "The accounts, the cards, everything." The color drained from Anastasia's face. The diamond bracelet on her wrist suddenly looked less like a symbol of love and more like a piece of rapidly depreciating collateral. "But how can she do that?" she stammered. "Power of attorney," he spat. "I gave it to her years ago, a fucking formality." He ran his hands through his hair, his composure completely gone. "I have to get off this island. I have to get to New York." He stormed out of the bedroom, Anastasia scrambling to follow him, pulling on a silk robe. He found the villa's manager, a calm, unflappable man named Mr. Baptiste, arranging a bouquet of hibiscus on a console table in the main living area. "Baptiste," Jason barked, his voice raw with urgency. "I need the jet, now! Ready the airstrip!" Mr. Baptiste looked at him with an expression of polite regret. "I am very sorry, Mr. Hawthorne, but that will not be possible." "What do you mean, not possible?" Jason demanded, his voice rising to a dangerous pitch. "I own the jet. I pay your salary. Get it done." "I received an email this morning, sir," Mr. Baptiste said, his gaze unwavering. "From Mrs. Hawthorne's office. The flight crew has been recalled to New York. The jet is no longer at our disposal. Furthermore, sir, all operational expenses for Serenity's End, including staff salaries and supplies, are to be billed directly to Mrs. Hawthorne's new primary account. We have been instructed not to extend any further credit to you personally." The words hung in the air, each one a hammer blow. He was not just a prisoner. He was a guest in a home that was no longer his. He was stranded, penniless, and utterly, completely at his wife's mercy. He looked around the magnificent room, at the priceless art on the walls, the stunning view of the sea, the very air thick with the scent of his own success. It was all a mirage. The gilded cage had become a real one. Just then a member of the staff entered, carrying a silver tray. On it was a single sealed envelope. "This was delivered by special courier from the mainland this morning, Mr. Hawthorne," the staff member said. Jason snatched the envelope. His name was written on the front in Callie's elegant, familiar script. His heart pounded as he tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of heavy, cream-colored paper. The message was short, but it was the most devastating blow of all. "Jason, enjoying the view. I've always found it so inspiring. It gives one such a sense of perspective. By the way, I took the liberty of changing the Wi-Fi password. It's now no more secrets. All one word. Lowercase. I'll be in touch. Callie." He stared at the note, his hands trembling. The cruelty of it, the sheer calculated brilliance, was breathtaking. She hadn't just cut off his money. She had cut off his connection to the world, his ability to fight back. She had left him with nothing but a Wi-Fi password that was a constant mocking reminder of his own folly. He sank into a chair, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a cold, terrifying emptiness. The sun was high in the sky now, the day in full, glorious swing. But for Jason Hawthorne, the world had gone dark. He was a millionaire on a private island, and he was, for the first time in his adult life, utterly and completely broke. The silence of paradise was now the sound of his own ruin. In the silent, air-conditioned chill of her Park Avenue library, Callie Hawthorne monitored the fallout with the dispassionate focus of a chess grandmaster. Her screens displayed a complex web of financial data, legal communications, and market reactions. The freezing of Jason's assets had sent minor but noticeable tremors through certain financial circles. Whispers were starting. A titan was stumbling. Marcus Thorne, her lawyer, sat opposite her, a file of documents open on his lap. He had been a friend of her father's, and his loyalty was to the woman he had known since she was a precocious teenager, not to the husband she had married. "The initial phase is complete." "Callie," he said, his voice a gravelly baritone. "The assets are secured. He's completely locked out. We've also filed for a temporary restraining order, citing financial misappropriation, which will prevent him from attempting to open new lines of credit or liquidate any undeclared assets we might have missed." "Good," Callie said, her eyes not leaving the screen. "What about Hawthorne Holdings?" "That's the delicate part," Marcus admitted. "Jason is the face and the primary stakeholder. The board is already panicking. They're calling an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. You, as the holder of his proxy, and now the controller of his majority shares, will be expected to attend." Callie finally looked at him. "I'll be there." "They will not be friendly," Marcus warned. "You're walking into a viper's nest. They see you as the vengeful wife, not a corporate leader." "Let them," Callie said, a flicker of steel in her eyes. "They've profited from his recklessness for years. It's time they were introduced to a more stable form of management." Her phone rang. It was a private number 1 she had been waiting for. She motioned for Marcus to stay as she answered, putting the call on speaker. "This is Callie Hawthorne." A man's voice, with a faint, unplaceable European accent, replied. "Mrs. Hawthorne." My name is Nikolai. I believe you were expecting my call. Nikolai was a ghost, a specialist in a field that didn't officially exist. He was a forensic investigator of the digital and financial underworld, a man who could find anything and anyone for the right price. Callie had engaged his services 6 months ago. Nikolai, she said, her voice even. Do you have it? I do, he confirmed. It was as you suspected. Well hidden. A labyrinth of trusts registered in the Cayman Islands, funneling into a numbered account in Liechtenstein, all under a holding company named Dubois Acquisitions. Callie's expression didn't change, but Marcus raised an eyebrow. Dubois, Anastasia's surname. And the beneficiary, Callie asked. The sole beneficiary is a Miss Anastasia Dubois, contingent upon her cohabitation with Mr. Hawthorne for a period of no less than 5 years. Or upon his death, Nikolai explained. It's a substantial trust, Mrs. Hawthorne, in the region of $50 million. He was setting her up for life. There it was, the ultimate betrayal. It wasn't just the affair, the casual flings she had learned to compartmentalize. This was a plan, a future, a replacement. The trust was funded by the sale of pre-IPO shares from a tech company Jason backed 2 years ago. Nikolai continued. An asset he never declared in your shared portfolio. I have the full transaction history. It's a clear case of marital asset concealment. Thank you, Nikolai, Callie said calmly. Transfer the files to the encrypted server we discussed. Your final payment has been authorized. She ended the call. The room was silent for a moment. 50 million. Marcus breathed, shaking his head. The unmitigated gall. It's not about the money, Marcus Callie said, her voice dangerously quiet. It's the premeditation. This wasn't a mistake. It was a strategy. She looked at the photo of Jason and Anastasia, still on her desk. The laughing, carefree couple. They weren't just on vacation. They were celebrating their future. A new, harder resolve settled over her. This was no longer just about teaching Jason a lesson. It was about dismantling the empire he had built on a foundation of lies. Back on Mustique, the initial shock had given way to a grim, suffocating reality. The paradise of yesterday had become a prison. The attentive staff now moved around Jason with a polite but distinct distance. They still served him his meals, but the warmth was gone. He was no longer the master of the house. He was a problem to be managed. Anastasia had retreated into a sullen silence. The dream had evaporated, and she was left with the terrifying prospect of a future she hadn't planned for. Her beauty was her only real currency, and its value was inextricably linked to the patronage of powerful men. With Jason's downfall, her own stock was plummeting. There has to be something you can do, she said for the 10th time that day. They were sitting on the veranda, the untouched lunch growing cold between them. What would you have me do? Anastasia. Jason snapped, his patience worn thin. Swim to the mainland. Send a message in a bottle. You're Jason Hawthorne. You know people, powerful people, she insisted, her voice rising with a note of hysteria. My powerful people can't be reached on a phone that doesn't work, with a credit card that's been declined, he roared. Don't you understand? She's cut me off at the knees. He slumped back in his chair, the fight draining out of him. He felt old, tired, and for the first time in his life, utterly powerless. His thoughts drifted back to Callie. Not the cold, calculating woman who had engineered his downfall, but the brilliant, fiery young lawyer he had first met at a fundraiser 2 decades ago. He had been captivated by her intelligence, her wit, her unassailable sense of self. He had pursued her relentlessly, seeing her as the ultimate acquisition, the perfect partner to legitimize his new money and build a dynasty. He had won her, married her, and then, over the years, he had slowly, carelessly taken her for granted. He had put her on a pedestal, admired her as a beautiful object, and forgotten about the formidable mind that lay behind the elegant facade. He had forgotten who she was. A memory surfaced unbidden. They were on this very island years ago. Their son Thomas was 5 and their daughter Chloe was 3. They were building a sand castle, and Jason, ever the ambitious builder, was trying to create an elaborate structure with turrets and moats. But the dry sand kept collapsing. It was Callie who had shown him the simple trick of mixing the sand with water to give it structure. You can't build anything lasting on a weak foundation. Jason, she had said her words light, but her meaning clear. He had laughed it off at the time. Now the memory felt like a prophecy. His empire, his life, was a sand castle built on a foundation of deceit. And Callie had just kicked it over. Desperate, he remembered the villa's satellite phone, a piece of emergency equipment he hadn't thought about in years. It was kept in the study in a locked safe. He found Mr. Baptiste and demanded the key. The manager, after a moment of hesitation, complied. The instructions from Mrs. Hawthorne had been about financial credit, not about a dusty old piece of hardware. Jason's hands trembled as he dialed the number for his New York office, bypassing the switchboard and calling his CFO David Chen directly on his private line. Chen was a numbers man, loyal only to the bottom line. David Jason said, his voice urgent. "It's Jason Hawthorne." There was a pause on the other end. "Jason, where are you?" "The board is in chaos." "Listen to me, David. Callie has gone insane. She's frozen everything. I need you to bypass her. Set up a new corporate account, transfer funds, do whatever you have to do. I'll make it worth your while. A 7-figure bonus, now." The silence on the other end stretched for an eternity. Jason could hear the faint sound of typing. "I'm sorry, Jason," David said, finally, his voice cold and formal. "I can't do that." "What do you mean, you can't?" Jason bellowed. "I'm the CEO. According to the documents I received this morning from Marcus Thorne." David said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You are the majority shareholder. However, your voting rights and all executive powers have been legally transferred via your power of attorney to Callie Hawthorne. She is, for all intents and purposes, the new CEO of Hawthorne Holdings. The board is meeting with her tomorrow to formalize the transition. Any instruction I take from you would be illegal." The phone slipped from Jason's hand and clattered onto the desk. CEO. She had not just taken his money. She had taken his company, his identity, his life's work. Furthermore, David added his voice a final dispassionate nail in the coffin, "Mrs. Hawthorne has already been in contact. She's authorized a full independent audit of all executive accounts and expenses for the last 10 years. She specifically mentioned a forensic look into the pre-IPO sale of your shares in a company called Innovate AI. Jason's blood ran cold. Innovate AI, the source of the funds for Anastasia's secret trust. She knew. She knew everything. This was no longer a marital dispute. This was a corporate takeover, a coup d'etat. And he was not just an exiled king. He was a potential criminal. He stumbled out of the study and onto the veranda, the brilliant Caribbean sun feeling like a spotlight on his humiliation. Anastasia looked up at him, her face a mask of anxious hope. Did you get through? Is it fixed? He just stared at her, the architect of his ruin. The $50 million woman. He looked at her youthful beauty, the carefully constructed artifice of her charm, and he felt nothing. No desire, no anger, just a vast, empty wasteland of regret. "Pack your bags, Anastasia," he said, his voice hollow. "Are we leaving?" she asked, a flicker of excitement in her eyes. "You are," he said, looking out at the endless, indifferent sea. "I'm not sure about me." He finally understood. Callie hadn't just stranded him on a private island. She had put him in a beautifully appointed cage and thrown away the key. And the name of the cage was Mystique. He was trapped in paradise, with nothing but the ghost of the man he used to be. The emergency board meeting of Hawthorne Holdings was convened in a room that radiated power. Located on the 50th floor of a skyscraper in the heart of Wall Street, the boardroom featured a gargantuan mahogany table polished to a mirror-shine chairs upholstered in dark grey leather and a panoramic view of the financial district. A concrete jungle where fortunes were made and lost in the blink of an eye. The air was thick with tension and testosterone. The board consisted of 10 men, a collection of grizzled industry veterans, slick corporate lawyers, and hard-nosed financiers. They were men who had ridden the wave of Jason Hawthorne's aggressive, often brutal business strategies to immense personal wealth. They were loyal to Jason, but more so, they were loyal to the status quo, to the river of money that flowed from his ventures. And now, a foreign element was being introduced into their ecosystem. They were waiting for Callie Hawthorne. The whispers had been flying all morning. Jason was incommunicado. His assets were frozen. His wife, the society hostess, the woman who organized charity galas, was making a power play. The consensus was that this was a domestic squabble, writ large an embarrassment that needed to be contained quickly. They would placate her offer a generous settlement and get things back to normal. The double doors of the boardroom opened, and Callie walked in. She was not the woman they expected. She was not clad in a demure dress, but in a sharply tailored dark navy pantsuit that spoke of authority. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. She was flanked by Marcus Thorne and 2 other lawyers from his firm, who moved with the quiet confidence of people who knew they held all the cards. Callie took her place at the head of the table, the seat that had always been Jason's, the seat that by proxy was now hers. The room fell silent. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said, her voice calm and clear, resonating with an authority they had never heard from her before. "Thank you for assembling on such short notice. I know there are many questions. Let me be direct. As of 9:00 a.m. yesterday, I have taken full operational and financial control of Jason Hawthorne's personal and corporate assets, including his majority stake in this company. A man named Robert Harrison, a portly, red-faced industrialist who was one of Jason's oldest allies, spoke first. "Now see here, Callie," he began, his tone condescending. "We all understand this is a difficult time, a personal matter. But this company is a multi-billion-dollar entity. You can't just—" "I can." Callie interrupted, her gaze sharp as a razor. "And I have. This is no longer a personal matter, Robert. This is a matter of corporate governance and fiduciary responsibility. For the past 48 hours, my team has been conducting a preliminary review of the company's financials. What we've found is concerning." She nodded to Marcus, who placed a sleek black folder in front of each board member. "Inside these folders," Callie continued, "you will find evidence of what my lawyers have termed gross financial mismanagement. You will find details of undeclared shell corporations, the use of corporate funds for personal expenses on a truly staggering scale, and the channeling of company profits into high-risk personal side ventures without board knowledge or approval. The board members began to flip through the documents, their expressions shifting from skepticism to shock, and then to a dawning, horrified understanding. The whispers died, replaced by the rustle of paper. I draw your attention to page 5. Callie said, her voice dropping slightly, drawing them in. It details the sale of pre-IPO shares in a tech company called Innovate AI, an asset that belonged to Hawthorne Holdings. The proceeds of that sale, approximately $53 million, were not reinvested into this company. They were diverted into a private trust registered in Liechtenstein. The sole beneficiary of this trust is a Miss Anastasia Dubois. The name hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Some of the men in the room had met Anastasia at company events. They knew who she was. The dots connected with sickening speed. This wasn't just infidelity. This was embezzlement. Jason Hawthorne has used this company as his personal piggy bank. Callie stated, her voice now ringing with cold fury. He has exposed all of you and our shareholders to enormous legal and financial risk. The SEC would have a field day with this, not to mention the IRS. The mood in the room had shifted completely. The vipers were no longer looking at her. They were looking at each other, their faces pale. The condescension was gone, replaced by fear. They were thinking of their own fortunes, their own reputations, their own potential complicity. "This is a catastrophe," mumbled another board member, a man named Henderson. No, Callie countered, her voice firm. It was a catastrophe waiting to happen. Today is the course correction. As of this moment, Hawthorne Holdings is under new leadership, my leadership. We will conduct a full, transparent, and brutal audit of every department. We will claw back every misappropriated dollar. We will cut off the dead wood and restructure from the top down. We will restore integrity and stability to this company. And we will not only survive, we will become stronger and more profitable than ever before. She paused, letting her words sink in. She looked at each man, meeting their gaze, daring them to challenge her. "You have a choice, gentlemen," she said, her voice softening almost imperceptibly. "You can fight me, and I will dissolve this board and install a new one by the end of the week. Or you can work with me. You can help me clean up the mess your friend and former CEO has made. Your positions and your considerable stock options will be secure, provided you are willing to embrace a new era of transparency and accountability." It was a master stroke. She had shown them the abyss, then offered them a lifeline. She wasn't just the vengeful wife. She was their savior. She was offering them amnesty in exchange for allegiance. Robert Harrison, the man who had tried to patronize her just minutes before, cleared his throat. "Callie." "Mrs. Hawthorne," he said, his tone now one of deep respect. "What do you need from us?" The coup was complete. Meanwhile, on Mustique, Jason had managed to find a way to make an outbound call using the villa's landline, billing it to a sympathetic hotelier on a neighboring island who owed him a favor from years past. His first call was not to a lawyer or a banker, but to his son Thomas. Thomas was 22, a recent graduate of Wharton, and possessed his mother's sharp intellect, though it was tempered by a youthful idealism that Jason had never quite understood. "Dad, what's going on? Mum's lawyers are everywhere. They're saying..." Listen to me, Thomas, Jason said, his voice low and urgent. Your mother has lost her mind. She's trying to destroy me, to destroy everything I've built for you and Chloe. There was a pause on the other end. She says you stole from the company Dad, that you set up a secret trust for your girlfriend. The bluntness of the accusation coming from his own son was like a punch to the gut. It's complicated, Thomas. It's business. Your mother doesn't understand. I think she understands perfectly, Thomas replied, his voice cold. I saw the documents, Dad. I'm at the office. She asked me to help with the audit. Jason felt a fresh wave of despair wash over him. She had turned his own son against him. She was not just dismantling his empire, she was erasing him from his own family. Thomas, you're my son, he pleaded, his voice cracking. You have to help me. Help you do what Dad Thomas asked, and there was a genuine, painful confusion in his voice. Help you hide more money. Help you lie to my mother. The woman you were supposed to love and protect. The woman who gave up her own career for you. She did this to herself. Jason roared, the desperation making him cruel. She knew the deal. No, Dad Thomas, said, his voice hardening, with a resolve that sounded eerily like his mother's. You knew the deal. You had a wife who was your partner in every sense of the word, and you treated her like an accessory. You had a family, and you gambled it all away for what, a younger model on a private island. I'm sorry, Dad. But you're on your own. The line went dead. Jason stood there, the receiver in his hand, the dial tone a mournful, mocking sound. He had lost his company. He had lost his son. He looked over at Anastasia, who was now frantically packing her designer luggage, a vulture picking at the carcass of their affair. He realized with a clarity that was both terrifying and liberating that he had nothing left to lose. But Callie had made one miscalculation. A man with nothing left to lose is a dangerous man. He is unpredictable. And as the sun set on another day in his gilded prison, a new desperate plan began to form in Jason Hawthorne's mind. If he couldn't get his empire back, he would do the next best thing. He would burn it to the ground. The news of Callie Hawthorne's boardroom coup spread through the elite circles of New York and London like wildfire. The initial narrative of a simple domestic dispute was quickly replaced by a more complex and compelling story. The quiet, elegant wife had revealed herself to be a corporate shark of the highest order. Callie, once a fixture on the society pages, was now a subject of fascination in the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times. She was no longer Mrs. Jason Hawthorne. She was Callie Vance Hawthorne, the interim CEO of a rebranded and suddenly intriguing Hawthorne Holdings. She worked with a relentless surgical precision. The audit she had initiated was unearthing years of Jason's financial legerdemain. She fired executives who were too deeply embedded in Jason's culture of corruption and promoted bright, overlooked talent from within the company. She met with bankers, reassured investors, and in a move of pure strategic brilliance, she scheduled a sit-down interview with a respected female journalist known for her tough, incisive profiles. She was controlling the narrative, recasting herself from the scorned woman to the savvy savior of a company on the brink. She also took care of the Anastasia problem. Marcus Thorne, on her instruction, sent a curt legal notice to the villa on Moustique. It informed Miss Dubois that the pre-nuptial agreement she thought she had with Jason, the $50 million trust, was now the subject of a criminal investigation into the fraudulent concealment of marital assets. Any attempt to against the funds would be met with immediate legal action. It also included a one-way economy-class plane ticket from St. Vincent to her hometown of Cleveland, Ohio, valid for the next 72 hours. The message was clear. The party was over. On Mystique, the arrival of the legal notice and the plane ticket sent Anastasia into a final panicked spiral. She turned on Jason her carefully constructed mask of adoration, crumbling to reveal the raw, grasping ambition beneath. "You ruined me," she shrieked, her voice echoing through the now sterile villa. "That money was mine, you promised me." Jason, who was now operating on a strange, almost detached level of consciousness, looked at her with a kind of weary pity. "It was never your money, Anastasia. It was my wife's. You were just the rental, and the lease is up." The cruelty of his words and the truth behind them silenced her. Within hours, she was gone. Mr. Baptiste arranged for a boat to take her to the main island of St. Vincent to catch her flight. As Jason watched her disappear over the horizon, he felt nothing. No sense of loss, no relief, just a vast, echoing emptiness. He was truly alone now, a ghost rattling around in the opulent mausoleum of his former life. The staff continued to feed him to maintain the property, all on Callie's dime. He was her prisoner, a living testament to her victory. He spent his days pacing the white sand beach, the Wi-Fi password, no more secrets, a constant ironic torment. But in his isolation, Jason's mind, the same mind that had built a billion-dollar empire, was not idle. It was turning, calculating, searching for one final desperate move. He couldn't win. He knew that. Callie had outmaneuvered him at every turn. But he could still unleash chaos. He could still inflict pain. He still had one secret left. It was a secret buried deep in the foundations of Hawthorne Holdings, a piece of information so toxic, so dangerous, that he had never even committed it to paper. It was a ghost from his past, a deal he had made at the very beginning of his career, a deal that had given him his initial seed capital, but had made him a silent partner in something deeply illicit. Years ago, when he was just a hungry, ambitious trader, he had facilitated a massive off-the-books currency trade for a Russian oligarch, a man named Dmitry Volkov. Volkov was not just a wealthy businessman. He was a key figure in a shadowy syndicate, a man with deep ties to organized crime and a reputation for unspeakable brutality. The deal had been dirty a way for Volkov to launder hundreds of millions of dollars out of Russia. Jason's reward had been a quiet, untraceable $10 million, the money he had used to start his own firm. He had justified it as a one-time sin, the necessary evil that had paved the way for his legitimate success. He had buried the memory and his connection to Volkov so deep, he had almost convinced himself it never happened. But Volkov never forgot. And Volkov did not like his business partners airing their dirty laundry in the Wall Street Journal. Using the last of the favors he was owed, Jason managed to get a message out through a chain of intermediaries. It was a simple message delivered to a specific lawyer in Cyprus who worked for Volkov. The message was, Callie Hawthorne's audit of Hawthorne Holdings is about to uncover the Genesis transaction. She is a threat to our mutual interests. It was the financial equivalent of pulling the pin on a grenade and leaving it in the boardroom. He had no idea what Volkov would do. Maybe nothing. Maybe something terrible. It was a roll of the dice, an act of pure nihilistic destruction. If he was going down, he would pull the entire temple down with him. A few days later, Callie was leaving the Hawthorne Holdings building late at night. She was tired, but invigorated. The restructuring was working. The stock was stabilizing. She had proven herself. As she walked towards her waiting car, two men in dark suits stepped out of the shadows. They were large, impassive, and they moved with an unnerving professional calm. Her driver, a former police officer, immediately tensed. "Mrs. Hawthorne, get in the car." But one of the men was already holding the door, his other hand inside his jacket. He didn't smile. "Mrs. Hawthorne," he said, his English thick with a Russian accent. "Mr. Volkov sends his regards. He is an old friend of your husband's. He has some concerns about your recent activities. He would like a meeting to discuss the past." A chill colder than any she had felt during the entire ordeal ran down Callie's spine. Volkov. She didn't know the name, but she understood the tone. This was not a corporate negotiation. This was a threat of a different order of magnitude. She realized with sickening clarity what Jason had done. Cornered and defeated, he had unleashed a monster. He had reached back into the darkest chapter of his past and sicked it on her. This was no longer about money or infidelity or corporate control. This was about survival. Callie, ever the strategist, showed no fear. She looked the man in the eye, her expression unreadable. "Tell Mr. Volkov," she said, her voice steady, "that I am always happy to meet with friends of my husband. Have him call my office to schedule an appointment." She got into her car, and it sped away into the night. But as she leaned back against the leather seat, the facade of calm dissolved, and she allowed herself a single, silent tear. Not of fear, but of a profound and bitter disappointment. She had fought a war, and won only to discover that her husband's final act of betrayal was to ensure that even in victory, she would never ever be free of him. The battle for Hawthorne Holdings was over, but a new, more dangerous war had just begun. The millionaire had been dethroned. His mistress discarded his accounts, frozen. But the consequences of his secrets were only just beginning to surface, threatening to pull everyone victor and vanquished alike into the undertow. The story of Jason and Callie Hawthorne isn't just a tale of wealth and betrayal. It's a chilling reminder that the secrets we keep are often more valuable and more dangerous than any stock portfolio. Callie won the corporate war, proving herself a master strategist in a world that had always underestimated her. But Jason's final desperate act, unleashing a ghost from his criminal past, has changed the game entirely. The battle for money is over, but the fight for survival has just begun. Can Callie outwit a ruthless oligarch with the same brilliance she used to dismantle her husband's empire? Or will Jason's last act of spite be the one that destroys them all? The story is far from over. Do you believe that walls can talk? That sometimes the very bricks around us hold stories too raw, too tangled to speak aloud? This is the story of a man who shattered hearts and trust in one swift stroke, erasing his unborn baby's name from the nursery wall. Little did he know that fate would carve that same name into the towering facade of his company's newest building. Love, ambition, betrayal, and redemption twist through every corridor of this tale. Buckle in for a journey that delves into hidden pasts and uncertain futures, where every character holds a key to a devastating secret. The late afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of Alexander Haven's corner office at Horizon Global Ventures. The golden light cast a halo on the gleaming awards and plaques that lined the walls, each one echoing the success that the Haven family had worked generations to achieve. Alexander, A tall, imposing figure with silver-streaked hair at just 38 leaned back in his leather chair, drumming his fingers on the polished mahogany desk. His gaze cold and distant, fixed on an ornate pen, an anniversary gift from his wife, Cassandra. In that moment, the pen symbolized everything that had once been simple and hopeful in his life. Now it only served as a reminder of secrets he had kept the people he had hurt. He had always prided himself on his ability to control every variable in his life. But as the afternoon light drifted across the office, he realized control had slipped through his fingers the very day he found out Cassandra was pregnant. They had never spoken much about children before. Sure, there were the passing fantasies of a large family, or a small one, depending on the day, but their careers always took center stage. Cassandra was a brilliant architect who had designed luxury estates from London to Bali. It was her passion, her calling. She had come from a humble background, and each building she created was a testament to how far she'd climbed. Alexander's phone buzzed. The name on the caller ID read Cassandra, and he felt a rush of guilt swirl inside him. She'd called 5 times that day, and each call had gone to voicemail. Now, perhaps out of reflex, he answered. Cassandra's voice was tight. She used his pet name, though the warmth that usually accompanied it was missing. "We need to talk. I'm at the house." Alexander swallowed. "I'll be there soon." He left the office without a backward glance, ignoring the stares of his employees as he stalked past glass-walled conference rooms. He drove to their estate on the outskirts of the city, a sprawling piece of land overshadowed by centuries-old oaks. The driveway alone was half a mile of winding pavement lined with perfectly manicured hedges. When he finally stepped inside, an uneasy silence welcomed him. Years ago, upon first acquiring the property, he and Cassandra had dreamed of filling those halls with laughter. Children's voices, dinner parties, new memories. They even had a room at the end of the upstairs corridor, designated as a nursery, its walls once adorned with gentle pastel colors. A rocking chair Cassandra's grandmother had passed down, and a small name plaque they'd chosen for their soon-to-be child, the child who would never come. He found Cassandra in the nursery. The walls were now blank, the rocking chair shoved into a corner. She stood with her back to him, arms crossed, shoulders trembling. "What have you done?" Her voice was steady, yet thick with pain. Alexander closed his eyes for a moment. He had instructed the staff to repaint the nursery and remove all traces of the name they had once agreed upon Adrian. It had been a reckless, impulsive decision, one made out of heartbreak and the fear of being haunted by a memory of what could have been. Losing the baby had hit him in a place he never knew existed, so he did the one thing that made sense at the time: erase everything that reminded him of it. Cassandra turned, revealing tears clinging to her lashes. "We never even talked about it," she whispered. "You just had them remove his name, like he never existed." "I couldn't stand it," Alexander said, his voice low. "Couldn't stand walking by this room and seeing that name every day. It hurt too much." She stared at him, eyes glassy with betrayal. "Hurt too much? For whom? For you?" She took a trembling breath. "Because I still dream of him at night. I wake up and forget he's gone. And now there's nothing left of him at all, except the emptiness." His throat burned. He wanted to hold her, to promise her it would be okay. But the chasm between them felt too wide. Cassandra brushed past him, leaving only the scent of her expensive perfume and heartbreak in the air. He stood in the barren nursery, haunted by the absence of the name that used to be there. He thought about how that single act of painting over a memory had torn him and Cassandra further apart, and he wondered if they would ever find their way back. Yet destiny had other plans. The name he'd buried was about to resurface in a place he'd never expect, etched in stone on the facade of a building that would soon reshape both their lives. Long before he met Cassandra, Alexander Haven was raised in a world of opulence. The Havens were a known name in Massachusetts, their family wealth tracing back to old shipping lines that made fortunes in the 19th century. Over time, their empire evolved into real estate investment banking and eventually high-tech ventures. Alexander's father, Gordon Haven, was a formidable presence, meticulous, shrewd, and intimidating. He had raised Alexander with the mantra, legacy. First, everything else second. While this instilled in Alexander a relentless drive for success, it also planted deep insecurities. He had grown to view relationships as stepping stones or potential pitfalls. Even in personal matters, he measured the risk and potential reward. Growing up, he rarely visited friends' homes, almost never had a slumber party or carefree evening away from the watchful eyes of his father and their entourage of staff. He was groomed for leadership, taught to win at any cost. Cassandra Delgado was nothing like the women in Alexander's social circle. A self-made prodigy, her architectural breakthroughs in eco-friendly designs caught the attention of environmentalists, real estate moguls, and philanthropists alike, including Bill and Melinda Gates, who admired her commitment to sustainability. Some whispered that she was on the short list to design a new philanthropic research center that Mark Zuckerberg was rumored to be funding. No one dared question her brilliance. She had an almost mystical ability to see aesthetics and engineering as two halves of the same whole. They met at a fundraising gala for a children's hospital in Boston. Cassandra was there to pitch a new pediatric ward design concept, one that would integrate nature-inspired spaces to comfort children during treatments. Alexander, ironically, was there to represent the Haven family's charitable giving, something that always gave them positive publicity, though the real philanthropic intentions were sometimes overshadowed by the press releases. Their connection was instant, and it went beyond physical attraction. Alexander, drawn to her fiery determination, found himself opening up in ways he never had. Cassandra, for her part, saw in him a man who yearned for genuine passion outside his business fortress. They talked about innovative building designs, philanthropic aspirations, and the ways architecture could shape a better future. Where Alexander was methodical, Cassandra was creative. Where he built walls, she tore them down. They married quickly, too quickly, some said, and formed what Boston's high society regarded as the power couple of the decade. At first, Alexander integrated Cassandra into the Haven empire, seamlessly trusting her insight to innovate in areas where the family's vision had grown stale. In turn, she reveled in the resources the Haven family's wealth provided, designing experimental complexes, advanced living facilities, and eco-conscious high-rises. Yet as the months wore on, Alexander's father Gordon began to question Cassandra's long-term loyalty. She wasn't from their world. Old money had a certain set of unspoken rules, and Cassandra wasn't one to follow them blindly. Over time, tensions rose. Cassandra refused to let the Haven name overshadow her personal identity. She pressed for her own brand recognition in architectural circles, which Gordon felt threatened the collective family prestige. Alexander stood uncomfortably between his father and his wife, often appeasing one at the expense of the other. Then came the pregnancy. For a moment, everything looked bright. Both Alexander and Cassandra believed that introducing a new life into their family might unify them in a deeper way. Gordon, too, softened at the idea of a grandchild to continue the Haven line. The baby would be named Adrian, after Cassandra's beloved grandfather, who had encouraged her to pursue architecture before he passed. The pregnancy also aligned with a major business venture. Alexander was spearheading an enormous real estate project in downtown Boston. He'd collaborated with City Hall to turn a derelict block into a modern corporate park, one that would bear the Haven name and stand as a testament to the family's ongoing influence. But fate was cruel. Complications led to a tragic miscarriage. Cassandra spiraled into grief, and Alexander retreated behind his stoic walls, shutting out his own pain. It was easier for him to bury it beneath new projects, negotiations, and deals than to face the magnitude of what they lost. And so the nursery remained untouched, a silent reminder until the day he decided to erase Adrian's name from its walls. The heartbreak in Cassandra's eyes that afternoon was not something that could be easily fixed. Their once tightly woven tapestry of ambition and love was unraveling. Little did either of them know just how violently the threads would be pulled apart by events lurking on the horizon. Time marched on. Work never stopped at Horizon Global Ventures. The real estate project that Alexander had been orchestrating, officially dubbed the Haven Complex, was inching closer to its grand unveiling. This multi-building campus promised to revitalize downtown Boston, merging state-of-the-art office spaces with green rooftops, large communal parks, and advanced energy-efficient technologies. Cassandra had contributed some early design concepts before her grief took her away from many responsibilities, and Alexander had allowed her that distance, not wanting to impose further stress. One crisp morning, Alexander's mind was spinning through a dozen tasks as he stepped out of his black SUV in front of the nearly completed Haven complex. He was there to do a final walkthrough before the massive media event scheduled 2 weeks later. Broad columns flanked an enormous plaza in the center of the development, lined with glass-clad towers that reached skyward. The sweet tang of fresh cement and the buzz of construction filled the air. His team of architects and investors trailed behind him, bustling with excitement to show off the progress. Alexander nodded politely, scanning the site with a practiced gaze. They crossed the plaza and approached the main tower, which soared upwards in shimmering glass and steel. A large ceremonial wall next to the entrance was reserved for a special unveiling, an inscription dedicated to the vision and future of the Haven legacy. Rumor had it that Alexander intended to carve a quote or place an emblem to commemorate the family's dedication to progress. Just as they were about to enter the tower, the site manager Miriam Kelly hurried up to Alexander with an odd look on her face. "Mr. Haven," she said, pushing her black-rimmed glasses up her nose. "We've discovered something on the decorative facade. It wasn't part of the official design, but it appears to be etched deep into the stone. It will take significant effort and time to remove." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "Etched like graffiti?" "Not exactly. It's a name, sir." She paused, swallowing hard. "Adrian." In an instant, Alexander's heart dropped. He stiffened. The mere mention of that name here in the heart of his largest development felt like a cosmic punch to the gut. "How did it get her there?" he demanded, voice taut. "We're still investigating," she replied, voice hushed. "It's small, but it's chiseled in a way that's deliberate, with actual stone carving techniques. Not just some random tagger with a spray can. It's on a corner of the decorative stone panel just to the right of the building's main entrance. We can remove it, but it will leave a visible patch unless we replace the entire panel, which might take weeks to reorder and install. A swirl of memories and guilt flooded Alexander. He could still see Cassandra's tear-stained eyes the day he repainted the nursery walls. Why here, why now? Was this some act of sabotage, or was it a bizarre coincidence? He turned to his team, feigning control. Gather the crew. Let's see this for ourselves. They walked around to the side of the building near the main entrance. Indeed, on the lower corner of a heavy stone block, in ornate script no more than 3 inches tall, he saw the name Adrian. It glinted in the morning light, as if mocking him. The cut was smooth, professionally done. Alexander felt as though the ghost of his child had found a way to appear at the very heart of his business empire. The crowd of engineers and project managers murmured, but none dared speak the name aloud again. Everyone felt the tension rippling from Alexander. Finally, he cleared his throat. Get the best stonemason to see if it can be carefully removed without replacing the entire block, he said, scanning their faces. And I want a full investigation. Check security footage. See who came through here. This is private property. There must be cameras. Miriam nodded. Yes, Mr. Haven. As the group filed away, Alexander stared at the etched name. Questions churned in his mind. Was someone trying to torment him? Or was it Cassandra, grappling with the memory of Adrian in her own anguished way? He knew she was a talented designer, but stone carving was not her skill set. Still, doubt flickered. He traced the letters with his fingertips, fighting the tightness in his chest. Adrian. A child who never got a chance at life, but who somehow kept reappearing. No matter how hard he tried to erase the name, it found its way back. The day after discovering the name on the building, Alexander hardly slept. Anxiety wrapped around him like a vice fueled by a new wave of tension at home. Cassandra, though physically present at their estate, felt emotionally distant. She had withdrawn to her personal design studio behind the house, offering no explanation for her absences or solitary nights. At the office, Alexander was met with an undercurrent of gossip. Employees whispered in hallways, exchanging glances when he passed. He knew they suspected something, that the etched name must hold personal significance. The Haven Empire might have soared on the wings of success, but it also flew through corridors built on secrets and half-truths. Desperate for answers, Alexander plunged himself into the security footage from the site. Along with Miriam and a small group of trusted IT specialists, he spent hours scrubbing through camera angles. They found little out of the ordinary, no suspicious intruders, no after-hours trespassers. The building's exterior cameras had either not been angled to that specific patch of stone or were obscured by scaffolding. It was possible that someone had hidden in a blind spot, but a near-total blank didn't satisfy him. He was certain there had to be more. Someone must have had both motive and access. Then a glitch on one camera's timestamp caught his eye. A short segment, no more than 15 minutes, was missing from the official logs. He turned to the IT specialist, a wiry young man named Conrad. "You see this?" Alexander said, pointing to the gap. "We're missing footage between 2:30 and 2:45 a.m. last Tuesday." Conrad tapped on his keyboard, sweat forming at his temples. "It looks like a forced corruption in the data. Someone with advanced knowledge of our systems might have done this deliberately." Alexander's fury rose. He felt his hands clench into fists. "We pay for state-of-the-art security, yet here we are. I want a list of everyone who had access to these cameras that night." Conrad nodded. "Of course, Mr. Haven." As the day wore on, a handful of potential suspects emerged, employees, contractors or external tech consultants who had the clearance to handle or manipulate the security feeds. But none stood out as having a personal vendetta to carve Adrian into the building's facade. As far as Alexander knew, that name and its significance were known only to family and a few close friends. Just before evening, he slipped away from the office to pay an unannounced visit to Cassandra's personal design studio. It was a minimalist glass annex behind their main residence, filled with sprawling drafting tables, half-finished models, and large windows overlooking a secluded garden. He found her hunched over a blueprint, wearing a plain black turtleneck and leggings. She barely acknowledged him when he stepped inside. "We need to talk," he said, his voice gentler than he intended. The tension between them was suffocating, but anger wouldn't help. She shrugged, maintaining focus on the blueprint. "About what?" He took a step closer. The name etched on the new building. Adrian. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? She stood up slowly, her eyes narrowed in astonishment. "What makes you think I would do that?" Alexander exhaled. "I'm not accusing you of anything, but you've been distant, and I know how important Adrian's memory is to you. This could be some act of grief." She paced across the studio, frustration evident. "So because I'm grieving, I'd break into your construction site in the dead of night and carve our baby's name on stone. Is that really what you think of me, Alexander?" He winced at the use of his full name. "I just need answers." Cassandra's eyes brimmed with tears. "I can't even stand looking at that building. It reminds me of what you did to the nursery, wiping away Adrian's name like he never existed. I'm not stepping foot near your precious Haven complex, let alone defacing it." Alexander stared at the floor. Guilt and suspicion clashed in his chest. He wanted to believe her. Over the years, she'd proven herself to be honorable and true, even if they were drifting apart. She picked up a small clay model she was working on, a conceptual piece for a pediatric clinic in Honduras. "This is how I honor Adrian," she said softly, tapping the model. "By designing places that help children. Because that was our dream, wasn't it? To do something meaningful for families. That dream died a little the day you repainted that room." Stung. Alexander nodded, unable to muster a response. He turned to leave, pausing at the door. "If you remember anything that might help, or if you see anything suspicious, you'll tell me." She nodded, though her expression made it clear she believed if Alexander really cared about her, he'd know how deeply he'd wounded her. He left the studio feeling colder than when he'd arrived. Over the next week, Alexander's frustrations mounted. His father Gordon, who had been conspicuously absent for months, supposedly overseas on business, unexpectedly returned. Gordon always had a knack for appearing at the worst possible time. One evening, he summoned Alexander to the Old Haven mansion in Beacon Hill, the historic family seat that Alexander had avoided since his childhood. Alexander arrived to find Gordon waiting in the study, a cavernous room lined with dusty tomes and antique furniture that smelled like old leather. 2 crystal glasses of expensive cognac sat on the table untouched. Son Gordon said, his deep voice echoing. "I've been hearing rumors. Something about the name Adrian carved into your new building. Care to explain?" Alexander's jaw clenched. He'd never told his father the baby's name. That was a conversation he and Cassandra had reserved for themselves, at least until the time was right. But perhaps gossip traveled faster than respect for privacy in Boston's elite circles. "Nothing to explain," Alexander replied, forcing calm. "It's vandalism, and I'm handling it. Gordon's expression was measured. "I understand losing a child is hard, but you need to keep your head in the game. The city is watching, the press is circling. You're set to be the face of this grand opening. Anything that smells of scandal or strife will tarnish the Haven name." Alexander's shoulders tensed. "Is that all you care about? The name not once have you asked how Cassandra or I are coping." Gordon's straightened lips pressed into a thin line. "Grief is personal. I'm not your therapist, but I do know the family legacy must remain intact. If you can't manage to keep it that way, I will step in." The threat lingered in the room like a noxious gas. Alexander took a long sip of the cognac, letting the burn steady his nerves. He was used to his father's cold approach to family matters. Showing vulnerability in front of Gordon was akin to bleeding in shark-infested waters. "That won't be necessary," Alexander said, determined. "I've got it under control." Gordon nodded, but the glint in his eyes said otherwise. "I trust you'll do what must be done." Their conversation ended abruptly. Alexander left, feeling the old mansion's oppressive weight crushing him. He hated that place. It reminded him of lonely childhood nights locked away in a stiff bedroom, while tutors and nannies drilled into him that everything was about legacy and image. Back at the estate, he found Cassandra's design studio empty. A quick text revealed she had gone to New York for a last-minute architecture symposium. In the past, she would have told him about any travel plans. He knew she was pulling away, forging her independence again, and it both frightened and angered him. Days marched on with no new leads about the carved name. The IT team found no conclusive evidence, and the stonemasons insisted it would cost tens of thousands of dollars to fix the etched stone, and that was assuming the project schedule could accommodate such a significant delay. With the grand opening fast approaching, Alexander faced a choice: reveal the name at the event, and risk a media circus, or patch it in a rushed manner, leaving an obvious scar on what was meant to be a pristine facade. He tried to push it from his mind by immersing himself in finalizing the details of the opening ceremony. He'd invited a roster of high-profile personalities, local politicians, celebrities, and philanthropic figures, even hoping to secure a cameo from Warren Buffett, who was rumored to be investing in a sustainable housing initiative. The event in many ways was a tribute to the Haven Empire's commitment to the future. Yet as the big day loomed, Alexander couldn't shake the eerie feeling that the name Adrian was more than a mere vandalism or cosmic coincidence. It felt like a reckoning for the callous way he had tried to paint over the nursery, to bury the sorrow too quickly. At last, the morning of the grand opening arrived. A crisp autumn breeze whipped through downtown Boston, sending leaves swirling around the newly laid plaza. Technicians bustled, finalizing the stage and sound systems. Towering banners bearing the Haven family crest fluttered from newly installed flagpoles. Alexander had spent the previous night practicing his speech in front of a mirror. He stood now backstage, wearing a tailored charcoal suit. Journalists with cameras angled for the best shot. Officials from City Hall mingled, and a small band rehearsed soft classical tunes. Despite the outward pomp, his mind was a tempest. He glanced at his phone, hoping to see a text from Cassandra, but there was nothing. She was back in Boston, but had not confirmed her attendance. He drew a slow breath, stepping onto the stage, as the announcer introduced him with a flourish. His speech began smoothly enough, praising Boston's heritage, the dedication of the City Council, the employees of Horizon Global Ventures, and the bright future symbolized by the Haven complex. He had a practiced way with words, honed by years of press conferences and philanthropic galas. Then his eyes caught a glimpse of someone unexpected in the crowd: Cassandra. She stood at the back, arms folded, her expression unreadable. For a moment his voice faltered, but he forged ahead. Applause peppered his speech. Lights flashed, cameras rolled. He concluded with a statement on legacy, how the Haven family strived to build not just buildings, but also hope for the next generation. The audience clapped politely. Alexander turned, motioning toward the large drape that covered the ceremonial inscription on the wall near the building's main entrance. As the drape fell away, it revealed the words, "For innovation, for progress, for the future." The crowd erupted in cheers, but the stone just beneath still carried the small yet haunting name, Adrian, now partially obscured by a subtle attempt at patchwork. The name remained legible up close, and soon curious murmurs rippled through the attendees. The tension in Alexander's stomach coiled. He stepped down from the podium, greeting officials and exchanging forced smiles. Media swarmed, some noticing the strange etching on the stone. He braced for the questions, though he prayed none would come. Yet they did. "Mr. Haven, can you comment on the name etched beneath your new inscription?" Alexander stiffened, but forced a measured smile. "We had a minor issue with vandalism. It's already being addressed." Before more questions could swarm, an older man approached someone Alexander recognized from his father's entourage, Charles Deering, a retired advisor who had served the Haven family for decades. His grey eyes flickered with concern. "We should speak privately," Charles said, guiding Alexander away from the crowd. They slipped into a side passage of the building's lobby. Smooth marble floors reflected the overhead lights. Charles wasted no time. "I believe I have information about who might have carved that name," he said. "I didn't speak sooner because I wasn't entirely sure, but new evidence came to my attention." Alexander's pulse quickened. "Go on." Charles fished an envelope from inside his coat. "Someone sent me still images from a CCTV feed, dated the night the carving must have happened. However, they're from an external camera across the street, not your official site cameras." Alexander took the envelope and peered at the black and white stills. The images showed a figure in a hooded jacket near the building's entrance. The figure stooped in the exact spot where the name was later found. Despite the angle and darkness, it was clearly not Cassandra. The person appeared stockier, with broader shoulders. He flipped through more images. One partial side view, though grainy, made his chest tighten. The face was partially visible, just enough to recognize him as Elias Ward, a childhood friend of Alexander's who had once worked at Horizon Global Ventures, but left under tense circumstances. Elias's family had once been in business with the Havens, but a few years back, Elias had been ousted amid a scandal that implicated him in a questionable real estate deal. Alexander hadn't spoken to him since. He looked up at Charles. "Elias. Why would he do this?" Charles frowned. "He's harbored resentment for a long time. It's possible he knew about your baby's name. He might have learned it from staff or overheard it from your father's lips." Shaken, Alexander clutched the photos. It made sense in a twisted way. Elias was cunning, and if he wanted to strike at Alexander's psyche, carving Adrian into the building was a cruel but potent way to do it. "But how did he manage to force a corruption in our security footage?" Alexander asked. "He's an IT expert, or at least he has connections," Charles replied. "He could have bribed someone." Rage simmered in Alexander's veins. Elias had taken a private tragedy and warped it into a weapon. The whole fiasco with the building was to undermine Alexander, to remind him that no matter how high you climb, your vulnerabilities can still be used against you. Charles placed a hand on Alexander's shoulder. Be careful. Confronting him without evidence could be risky, but at least you now know who you're dealing with." Alexander nodded, pulses of adrenaline flooding his system. The revelation brought no solace. If anything, it deepened the emotional turmoil. He glanced toward the exit, spotting Cassandra watching him from afar. Her eyes flicked from him to the envelope in his hand, curiosity evident. He couldn't confront Elias publicly, not at that moment. But he had a sinking feeling that the worst was yet to come. That evening, after the event ended and the crowd dispersed, Alexander found Cassandra in the estate's expansive kitchen, rummaging for a late-night snack. The overhead light illuminated her exhaustion. She looked up as he entered, the question in her gaze, wordless but clear. He set the envelope on the marble island. It was Elias Ward. She blinked, confused. Elias? I haven't heard that name in ages. He carved Adrian's name on the building. Alexander nodded, pulling out the still images and laying them before her. He had access knowledge and a grudge. It's all here. She studied the images, her face darkening. I still don't understand his motive. Revenge. I had to let him go from Horizon a few years back, after he'd jeopardized one of our major deals. He's held a grudge ever since. Cassandra let out a slow breath. So in his twisted mind, your grief became his ammunition. That's beyond cruel. Alexander reached for her hand, longing for a connection they'd both neglected. I'm sorry. For how I handled everything with Adrian. For how I erased his name from the nursery. None of this justifies that, but I want you to know I regret it. She didn't pull away. I know you hurt too, Alec, but it felt like you tried to wash him out of our lives the moment it got too painful. He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. I was wrong. They stood in quiet sorrow, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. For the first time in what felt like ages, they seemed united by the same sense of loss. Finally, Cassandra spoke. What are you going to do about Elias? Alexander inhaled. Confront him, but carefully. For now, I'll gather more definitive proof. Maybe we can keep it out of the courts. I just want him to understand there are consequences. Cassandra set the photos aside. I'll help however I can. It wasn't a declaration of forgiveness or a renewal of vows, but it was a step one that made Alexander's chest loosen just a fraction. 2 days later, Alexander received a cryptic text on his personal phone. We should talk. I have information you don't want made public. The bar at the Old Derby on Salem Street, 9 p.m. Come alone. It was unsigned, but the message felt like a signature of its own. Elias. Alexander hesitated. This was precisely the kind of clandestine meeting that could lead to a confrontation. Still, he needed to settle the issue. The swirl of rumors around the Haven complex had grown. Several local blogs were speculating about the mysterious name. He couldn't afford for the gossip to infect the project's reputation further, or to exploit Cassandra's private grief. At 9 p.m. sharp, Alexander arrived at the Old Derby, a dimly lit bar with dark wood booths and an ancient, dusty chandelier. No sign announced who owned it, but it was an open secret that the place was a hangout for shady deals and hush-hush conversations. He spotted Elias in a corner booth, swirling a half-empty glass of whiskey. Shorter than Alexander, but built sturdier. Elias had a face etched by cynicism. He smirked when he saw Alexander approach. I knew you'd come, Elias said, motioning for Alexander to sit. Alexander slid into the booth, crossing his arms. "You've got a lot of nerve. Carving Adrian's name. My baby's name into my building to prove some twisted point." Elias raised a brow. "It got your attention, didn't it?" Alexander bristled. "What do you want?" Elias sipped his whiskey. "An apology. Compensation. A chance at redemption. There was a time we were close friends, Alexander. I grew up with you. We planned on conquering the world together, but you kicked me to the curb without a second thought." "You committed fraud," Alexander hissed. "I had no choice." "You always have a choice," Elias corrected. "And I might have some interesting pieces of information that, if leaked, could shine a less than rosy light on your precious Haven empire. Not to mention some personal details about your marriage." Alexander leaned forward, his eyes aflame. "Is that a threat?" "It's business," Elias said, with an indifferent shrug. "But I'll consider it a personal favor if you reinstate me into Horizon Global Ventures in a senior capacity. Give me a stake in one of your next big projects. Let me back in the game." Alexander stared at him, a swirl of disgust and pity roiling. "You'd stoop this low?" Elias raised his glass in a mock toast. "Come on. We both know what your father taught us. Success is about leverage. I have leverage now." Alexander stood. "I won't be blackmailed." Elias shrugged, unbothered. "Then you can watch me dismantle your carefully curated world piece by piece. I wonder how the press would react if they learned the real reason behind that carved name. Or if certain financial transactions were put into public record." Alexander's fists clenched, but he forced himself to walk away. Engaging in violence or an open confrontation here would only complicate matters further. As he left the bar, Elias's eyes burned into his back. Outside, the chilly air stung his cheeks, matching the fury that flared in him. Back at Horizon Global Ventures, Alexander convened a small circle of trusted advisors: Miriam Kelly, Charles Deering, and an old ally, Jessica Freeman, the firm's head of compliance. They pored over files detailing Elias's previous projects, searching for any vulnerabilities or potential wrongdoing that Alexander could use as a counter-leverage. An exasperated sigh slipped from Alexander as they found only minimal leads. Elias's misdeeds were well documented from the prior scandal, but he had skillfully wiped most records beyond that. The man was cunning, leaving little behind that could incriminate him now. Cassandra, too, joined the meetings for the first time since the miscarriage. She offered a fresh perspective, though her role was mostly supportive. Alexander felt a glimmer of their old partnership, the synergy that had once made them unstoppable. Late one evening, while scanning the older architectural plans for the Haven complex, Cassandra found a cryptic note scrawled in the margins. A note referencing a specialized vault in the sub-basement designed for data storage, one that Elias had insisted on implementing when he was still with the company. "This sub-basement vault," she said, pushing the plan toward Alexander. "Do you remember authorizing it?" He furrowed his brow, scanning the document. "Not specifically. Elias was heading security protocols back then. He might have snuck it into the design." Charles leaned in, adjusting his reading glasses. "I recall some mention of a state-of-the-art data center, but we never used it. The project was scrapped after Elias left." Cassandra tapped her pen on the blueprint. If Elias had free rein to design it, maybe he stored something there, some leverage. Miriam nodded. He might be counting on no one remembering this vault exists. It's possible he's stashed files there that he can threaten to reveal. Alexander stood. "We're going down there." Under the cover of night, Alexander Cassandra. Miriam and Charles slipped into the Haven complex. They made their way to the sub-basement, guided by the dusty blueprint and the flicker of overhead fluorescent lights. Occasionally, a distant hum of machinery echoed through the concrete corridors. At the far end of a deserted hallway, they found the entrance to the vault, a nondescript metal door with an electronic keypad. Miriam produced a small hacking tool, courtesy of their IT department. She set to work, sweat beading on her forehead, until a faint click announced success. Inside, they discovered a chamber lined with racks meant for servers that never arrived. The air was musty thick with disuse. It took them a while to find anything unusual until Cassandra noticed a steel cabinet in a corner. It was locked, but with a traditional padlock instead of advanced electronics. Charles pried it open with a crowbar. Inside sat a single external hard drive labeled HGV Archives. Next to it lay a dusty stack of documents. Their hearts pounded in unison. Alexander carefully lifted the drive. This must be Elias's stash. He rummaged through the papers, spotting spreadsheets, old memos, and references to questionable deals. Some were legitimate business records, others had confidential stamped across them in thick red letters. The final sheet in the pile drew his eye a ledger listing large sums of money, moving between shell companies, including suspicious references to Adelphi Holdings, a name Alexander had never encountered. They exchanged wary glances, suspecting that Elias had compiled these documents to blackmail the Haven family or any business partners. The question was, who was the real target? Miriam frowned. He might have documented wrongdoing in the Haven Empire, possibly your father's older deals, maybe your father's or your grandfather's, or he might have forged some parts to create false accusations. Either way, it's a time bomb. Cassandra brushed her fingers over the ledger. Could it be tied to your father's secret expansions overseas? I always found it strange how hush-hush Gordon was about certain properties in Europe and Asia. Alexander looked grim. This is more extensive than I imagined. My father might have skeletons buried in places I never knew existed. Charles cleared his throat. We should get these files analyzed, sort out what's real. If some of these are legitimate records, your father could face legal trouble. A wave of fatigue washed over Alexander. Elias had set a trap. Possibly Gordon was complicit in questionable dealings. If so, exposing this could shatter the entire Haven Foundation. But burying the truth would only empower Elias's blackmail attempts. After carefully photographing the documents, they left the vault, locking it behind them. Each step up the sub-basement stairs felt heavier. Alexander's mind raced with potential scenarios, from criminal investigations to media firestorms. But overshadowing all of it was the name Adrian. How the memory of his unborn son had been twisted into the crowbar that pried open these hidden secrets. The next morning, Alexander summoned Gordon to his estate, producing the files and confronting him directly. In Cassandra's presence, the older man examined the documents without betraying much emotion. Then he looked up, eyes icy. Elias was always a snake, he said simply. And you've proven yourself naive for letting him collect these. Alexander's voice shook with outrage. Don't deflect. These deals, offshore shell companies, questionable partnerships. This is bigger than Elias. Did you sign off on all this? Gordon's jaw tightened. I did what had to be done to keep our family's fortune intact. Do you have any idea the lengths I went to ensure the Havens remained powerful? We live in a harsh world, Alexander. Sometimes that means forging alliances and sealing deals in ways that aren't publicly palatable. Cassandra's hand flew to her mouth. That's your justification for money laundering bribery. Whatever else is in those documents, Gordon slammed his fist on the table. Do not judge me. Everything I did was for the family. I built an empire for you, Alexander. And here you are, unraveling it all because some ungrateful friend decided to toss around petty threats. Alexander inhaled sharply. Petty threats. He carved Adrian's name on our building to torment us. Don't you understand what this means to Cassandra and me? Gordon's gaze flicked toward Cassandra, momentarily softening. I'm sorry about your child. Truly. But from a business standpoint, Alexander cut him off. Stop. You can't reduce everything to business. This is our family. A tension-soaked silence stretched. Eventually, Cassandra intervened. We need to decide what to do with Elias and with these files. If the media gets hold of this, your entire legacy is at risk. Gordon's lips thinned. Offer him what he wants within reason, and bury this. The Haven name must remain unscathed. Alexander bristled. No. I'm done paying for blackmail. We need to handle this differently. Then handle it, Gordon said, rising from his seat. But don't expect me to take the blame if you fail. He left in a swirl of expensive cologne and bitterness. Alexander clenched his jaw. Cassandra placed a tentative hand on his shoulder. We'll figure it out, she said. But even as she spoke, fear tinged her voice. Days passed, and the pressure mounted. Alexander and Cassandra moved through the estate like ghosts, each lost in a storm of thoughts. Cassandra tried to break the silence more than once, but Alexander was too consumed with forging a strategy to defeat Elias without letting the blackmail files go public. One evening, as a cold rain battered the windows, Cassandra found Alexander in the study, staring at old family photos. He fixated on one of them, a shot of him and Cassandra in front of the nursery, just after she announced she was pregnant, both beaming with unrestrained joy. It felt like a lifetime ago. She sat beside him, sliding an arm around his shoulders. For the first time in weeks, he leaned into her warmth, letting out a shaky breath. I keep trying to hold everything together, he whispered, voice hoarse. But maybe it's time to let it fall apart, so we can rebuild honestly. Cassandra hesitated, her fingers stroking his hair. What do you mean? I mean, maybe we come clean. Let the authorities see those documents, see if there's wrongdoing, and if it implicates my father, so be it. I can't keep living in this twisted circle of blackmail and secrets. A tear escaped Cassandra's eye. That's a huge risk, Alec. It could destroy the Haven name. He swallowed. Our child was destroyed by secrets, too. I never told you how I truly felt after we lost Adrian, how broken I was. I tried to bury it, and it only caused more pain. I don't want to bury anything anymore. Cassandra's tears flowed freely. She cupped his cheeks, searching his gaze. I've hated you for wiping out Adrian's name, for ignoring my grief. But part of me knew you were doing it out of your own heartbreak. I just couldn't face it. Maybe I needed to hate someone. Alexander held her close. I'm sorry. Truly. I wish I could redo it all, but this is our only chance to make something right. If I have to risk the Haven name for it, I will. They held each other for a long time in silence, the patter of rain mixing with the gentle hum of their quiet sobs. Bolstered by Cassandra's support, Alexander arranged a meeting with an attorney experienced in corporate wrongdoing and whistleblowing cases. Cassandra insisted on joining, placing her own name on the line if it meant forging a path toward honesty. The attorney, Janet Huang, listened intently as they recounted the story. Elias's blackmail, the suspicious documents, Gordon's potential involvement. Janet tapped her pen on a legal pad. Her brow furrowed. "You could absolutely go to the authorities with this," Janet said. "But the repercussions will be swift. If your father is named, the press will devour the scandal. Your business empire could face asset freezes, investor pullouts. Worst case, you might be forced out of Horizon altogether." Alexander nodded grimly. "We understand. But if we let Elias hold this over us, we'll never be free." Janet leaned forward, eyes intense. "There is another approach. We can compile the documents properly, highlight any legitimate wrongdoing, and strike a deal with the authorities, cooperate fully in exchange for leniency, especially if you personally had no knowledge or involvement. Then you use that official stance to face Elias. If he tries to leak anything else, it'll either be old news or overshadowed by your proactive cooperation." Cassandra looked at Alexander, and he squeezed her hand. "Let's do it," he said. A week later, everything unfolded in a maelstrom. Alexander handed over the stash of documents to federal investigators. Gordon, upon learning of his son's plan, erupted in fury, threatening to disown Alexander and disclaim him from the Haven fortune. In a heated exchange, Alexander retorted that no legacy was worth sacrificing integrity. The media storm was immediate. Headlines blared, "Haven Empire under investigation." Stock prices wobbled. Enemies came out of the woodwork, piling on claims and rumors. Some of the documents did implicate Gordon in shady overseas dealings, though the extent of criminal liability remained uncertain. Elias, furious that Alexander had circumvented his blackmail, attempted to leak additional documents, but they were dismissed as either already in possession of investigators or irrelevant. The worst damage fell on Gordon's personal reputation. Alexander stood poised to lose a sizable chunk of the family wealth, but ironically his public image remained relatively unscathed. In some corners, he was hailed as a man who chose the moral high ground. Cassandra stood by him, offering unwavering support through the barrage of cameras and microphones. In the midst of chaos, they found themselves drawing closer, forging a new intimacy shaped by shared adversity and honesty. Amid the swirling fallout, Alexander decided to rectify his greatest regret. While Cassandra was away at a charity event, he snuck into the old nursery. Since the day he painted over the walls, the room had remained cold, empty, and lifeless. He reopened the sealed cans of paint, carefully mixing soft blues and greys, the same palette they had originally chosen. Next, with trembling hands, he painted the name Adrian in delicate lettering on the wall above where the crib once stood. He added small embellishments, little stars, a crescent moon evoking the night sky they had once envisioned for their child's peaceful dreams. When Cassandra returned that evening, she found him in the nursery, paintbrush in hand, tears slipping down his cheeks. He gestured silently to the wall. She pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes filling with tears. She joined him, picking up a brush and adding her own finishing touches. They worked side by side, recreating what had been lost. Forging a small sanctuary, not for a living child, but for a memory that would always hold a corner of their hearts. Afterward, they slumped together on the floor, leaning against the freshly painted wall. For the first time, the name Adrian brought them solace instead of sorrow. Several months later, the investigations concluded. Gordon faced penalties, steep fines, partial relinquishment of overseas assets, and a forced retirement from the board of Horizon Global Ventures. Alexander took the reins fully, albeit under the scrutiny of new compliance measures. The company survived battered but intact. For many employees, Alexander's willingness to confront corruption ignited a renewed faith in Horizon's future. Elias vanished from Boston's high society rumors, swirling that he fled the country. With no leverage left, his name faded into the background. Few missed him. During a quiet afternoon, Alexander and Cassandra strolled hand in hand through the Haven Complex Plaza. They paused at the stone panel near the entrance where Adrian had once been etched. A faint outline of the letters was still visible even after professional repairs. Instead of resentment, Alexander felt a gentle pang of remembrance. Cassandra rested her head on his shoulder. It's strange how it all turned out. Adrian's name brought so much conflict, but in the end, it brought us back together. Alexander nodded softly, kissing her temple. It's not the way I would have chosen, but I guess fate finds odd ways to guide us. She smiled through lingering sadness. I've been thinking a lot about the future, about maybe trying for another child one day. The corners of Alexander's mouth lifted. I'd like that, he whispered. And he knew despite the scars they were stronger than before. That evening they returned to the estate. Outside the nursery, Cassandra paused, placing her palm on the fresh paint. They didn't need to erase Adrian's memory anymore. Love and acceptance had replaced denial and guilt. In time, they would fill that house with laughter, and maybe, just maybe, Adrian's name would become a whisper of hope rather than a cry of loss. And there you have it, a tale of ambition and heartbreak, where a single etched name tore through family secrets and forced a reckoning that no one saw coming. In the end, Alexander and Cassandra found the courage to face the ghosts that haunted them, to stand up against blackmail, and to carve a new path defined not by hidden deals or erased memories, but by honesty and love.